Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Intercity Visit virtual panel, our second of two installments. I'm Rose Washington, CEO of Tulsa Economic Development Corporation and chair-elect of the Tulsa Regional Chamber. Each fall, the Chamber takes a delegation of approximately 100 business leaders, elected officials, educational administrators, young professionals, and regional and tribal members and partners to a peer city to hear best practices on topics spanning economic development, tourism, government affairs, and community development. During the past decades, we have visited, and many of you have joined us in visiting Nashville, Portland, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Fort Worth, and several others, and we have learned a great deal during each of those visits. During the current environment, as you understand, we obviously can't conduct an in-person trip this year, so we're doing the next best thing, virtual visits to multiple cities. Today is our second installment of our 2020 Intercity visit. Last week, we explored downtown and river development with leaders from Des Moines, Omaha, and Milwaukee. Today, we are very fortunate to engage with three cities, Detroit, Michigan, Atlanta, Georgia, and once again, Omaha, Nebraska, on the topics of entrepreneurship and inclusive economic development. If you have questions for our panelists, please enter your name and your company's name in the chat feature, and we will get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of our agenda. Before we dive in with our panelists, I'd like to thank the generous sponsors of this year's virtual Intercity visit. Our presenting sponsor, Nabholz Construction, and our gold sponsor, Beck Design. We're pleased to have Carla White with us today, who is Senior Interior Designer for Beck Design, and she will introduce today's expert panelists. Carla.
Thank you, Rose, and good morning. I'd like to start with Pamela today. Pamela Lewis is the Executive Director of the New Economy Initiative in Detroit, Michigan. She joined NEI in 2011 as a Senior Program Officer and was named the Initiatives Director in 2016. Under her leadership, NEI is seen as a leading advocate for inclusive entrepreneurship locally and among other entrepreneurial support leaders. An engineer by training, Pamela has more than 20 years of experience in process improvement and program management. Ryan Wilson is the co-founder and CEO of TGS Holdings, a consumer lifestyle and hospitality company based in Atlanta, Georgia. The company's holdings consist of The Gathering Spot, a private membership club, and A3C, a music, tech, and film conference and festival. At the age of 24, Ryan and his business partner raised private capital from investors to open their first Gathering Spot location in Atlanta. Now a home for creative business professionals and entrepreneurs. The Gathering Spot concept has grown to include Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles. Willie Barney is the founder and president of DWB Resultants, a national consulting firm that specializes in strategic planning, communications research, and community organizing and diversity and inclusion. The Resultants experience includes working with clients in the corporate, nonprofit, and faith-based sectors across the country. The team focuses on transforming the dreams and visions of communities and clients into solutions and results. He is best known for his role as the founder, president, and facilitator of the Empowerment Network, a collaborative of residents, leaders, and organizations working to facilitate positive change in Omaha, Nebraska, and other cities across the country. Thank you all for joining us today. Pamela Lewis, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Carla, Jim, Rose, and all of you. So nice to be with you today. even if it's on Zoom. Maybe one day we'll see each other in person, but I appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you and share a little bit about what we're doing in Detroit. I want to just start by saying that I live in a city that often gets attention, but it isn't always necessarily the positive kind. And matter of fact, in 2009, the cover of Times Magazine read, "The Tragedy of Detroit." They even had reporters purchase a house in the city and spend a year writing stories about Detroit's issues and how it might rise again. Someone who's been raised there, and it's been a community to me, it felt like those photographers and the ruined photography that accompanied their stories were creating this derelict, empty, and abandoned narrative. So imagine if our cities were human beings. For Detroit, she'd be one where many have opinions about her, but rarely get to know her. The great, the good, the indifferent, the bad. None of us should be sized up by our worst days or even by our most charming parts of our personalities. We all have a variety of facets that reflect something different. Are you guys hearing me okay? Okay, because I'm getting some static. So I think that the businesses that make up our national economy are similar to that. According to my colleagues at the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Team, there are various typologies of businesses and they all matter to recovery, just in different ways. So what do I mean by this? Think about the millions of businesses that are under 100 employees in this country. 22 million unincorporated sole proprietors matter because they bring income for their owners. 3.9 million Main Street businesses matter because they bring accessible jobs and services to residents. The 4.2 million manufacturing and supply chain businesses matter because they are our regional employers and key contributors to regional economic growth. And then the 44,000 Gazelle and high growth innovator businesses matter because they accelerate productivity and innovation. Now, it's good to be reminded that 70% of that group are actually sole proprietors. So why am I bringing that up? In Detroit, when looking at the 62,000 reported businesses, when we last registered them, sole proprietors represent at least 78%. So I'll just let that sink in. And of the 49,000 Black-owned businesses in Detroit, the interesting thing about Detroit, we don't have an issue with Black people owning businesses. We have an issue with Black people owning businesses that employ others. And of the 49,000 Black businesses owned in Detroit, only 98% are sole proprietors. So today I'd like to focus on the theme of this entrepreneurship and inclusive economic development, honing in on the sole proprietor and Main Street micro businesses, particularly those led by people of color. So now, what does that have to do with New Economy Initiative? So at NEI, we are basically a strategic philanthropic collaborative. 10 foundations, started with $100 million 10 years ago. So Ford, Knight, Kresge, and others. We've been working to support underserved small businesses for years. We've been using philanthropic grant dollars to convene, catalyze, and make grants to nonprofits that are delivering practical assistance, affordable loan capital, and access to resources and affordable spaces. So we call these types of nonprofits business support organizations. Our work has been making grants and creating culture where these organizations assisting underserved small businesses see themselves as a network. So community development financial institutions, CDFIs, microfinance organizations, practical assistance providers, even community development organizations are the types of nonprofits that are a part of the organizations we fund. This is a network that philanthropy has invested heavily in. This is a network that only philanthropy has invested in. So when NEI was launched in 2007, we actually focused on innovation-led startups, but 6 years ago is when our work shifted to intentionally focus on more small business development in underserved communities like Detroit. This shift was driven by understanding that micro businesses are just as valuable to the economy as a tech and innovation-based startup, especially in creating proximate jobs for residents and using entrepreneurship as a path to wealth building for people of color. So since that time, we've been determined to convene our grantees regularly so that they function as a network, create accessible paths, no obligation capital to help the business grow, and then engage community development organizations as key players, as trusted connectors of the businesses in their neighborhoods to key resources. So just in the last 3 years, about 8,000 micro businesses have been assisted, 780 have started, and of those, 67% are minority-led, 56% women-led, 15% immigrant-led. But the events of the last 7 months have exposed fissures in the system that's causing many of us in Detroit to work differently on how we support the underserved small business. So when COVID hit and we heard that the SBA had planned to offer Paycheck Protection Program loans through commercial banks across the country, we were not enthused. This lack of enthusiasm was mostly driven by data that even in 2019 showed 70% of SBA 7A loans go to white male-led businesses with an average loan size of $350,000. These are large small businesses. 6% to Latinx businesses, 3% to Black-owned. So the profile of an SBA loan recipient on a good day was not the small business profile of a Detroit business. And a lot of Detroit businesses have limited relationships with banks. So they struggled to gain access to PPP in the first round. And we aren't even sure how many just chose not to apply. Now, one thing to keep in mind that being a Black-owned business or minority-owned business under 3 employees is not unique to Detroit. That is actually a stat that is across the country. So like I said, you have so few minority-owned businesses that are employer-based, met with a program PPP, which was designed for job retention of employees. So it's no wonder that 3 zip codes in the city of Southfield, which is a suburb north of Detroit, would receive more PPP loans than most of all the zip codes in Detroit combined. So that's why it was really important that this network of nonprofits that we've been investing in sprang into action. And so we were able to activate our funders to provide loan relief for all those that had loans through the CDFIs or microfinance organizations, rent relief, coordinated practical assistance, and even if they didn't have brick and mortar establishments, because the state was providing grants for that, we were able to provide many grants for these businesses that were those sole proprietors or a 3-man business that maybe didn't even have a brick and mortar platform. So a month later, when the city was about to reopen for the first time, the mayor's office, the local EDO, which is the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, and private sector leaders, our utility leaders, the Dan Gilbert organizations, Blue Cross Blue Shield, joined with us and activated this coalition of multi-sector volunteers and stood up what we call the Detroit Means Business program. So it's a platform to provide reopening guidelines, access to free PPE, a call center that people can talk to, people that can help them navigate how to apply for these things directly. And the gift of it was that now for the first time, we have private, public, and nonprofit sectors leaders sitting at the same table. That's happened before, but it's never happened in service to a small business. Plus, we have actual business owners engaged to keep us honest. So what are the points I want to leave with you as you think about how you support entrepreneurship, small business development, and inclusive economic development in your beautiful city of Tulsa, which I hope to see one day. Number 1, do not discount the role of micro businesses in your city, especially those led by people of color or traditionally underserved individuals. They may not be big GDP contributors, but they are playing a role in providing accessible jobs and building wealth in your city. Number 2, because the range of small businesses is so broad, from 1 to 500 and more in some sectors, think about activating programs that specifically address the needs of a micro business, since most businesses fall into this category. Number 3, I feel like a Hamilton scene. I don't know if you, never mind, that didn't go over too well. Number 3, there is a role for philanthropy in our lower income communities. The grant dollars that philanthropy can bring can be used to support underserved businesses' growth through nonprofit service providers and also to de-risk private sector loan capital. So if you need help convincing the foundations in your community why there's a charitable purpose approach to investing in supporting underserved small business, happy to talk to you about that. And then number 4, last, how can we practitioners encourage the federal government to reassess how SBA loan capital is deployed and remove the factors that limit the percentage of loans to Latinx and Black businesses across the country? So I hope that was useful to you. I look forward to hearing from Ryan and Willie, and we'll talk later. Thank you.
Awesome. It's so good to be with this group. My dad is from Fort Smith, Arkansas, and so I've spent some time in Tulsa over the years, and so good to connect virtually. My name is Ryan Wilson. As was mentioned, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a business called The Gathering Spot. The best way to understand what we do at TGS is we connect people. I tell folks that we're more in the community business than the space business, but we have a lot of space. The first club that we built in Atlanta is about 25,000 square feet. It's divided between event space, where we host really any type of event that you can imagine, from cocktail parties to seated plated dinners to movie screenings. It's been in total since 2016 about 7,000 events we've hosted over the years. The next part of the club is a restaurant and bar. It's full service. We're open for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And the last part is collaborative workspace. So that's conference rooms, long like workstations, and private offices. The best comp there, really looking at the rise of the co-working industry. We were able to combine the best practices, I think, of co-working and private clubs. But again, centered around a community. So the youngest member is 21, the oldest is 88. Our club represents the full spectrum of what Atlanta has to offer. And so I'm going to do my best to talk about a city that I love a tremendous amount in talking about Atlanta, and to share some of the things that I think, even through my story, really represents what's possible in Atlanta, and what Atlanta has been getting right in a lot of ways. I'll touch on some things where I think we've got some opportunities as a market, but very much so looking forward to the discussion. I will also give these comments with the backdrop of my family been entrepreneurs in this city for a very long time. So part of what I share is also our family's experience of doing business in Atlanta. To go all the way to the beginning, I did not want to be an entrepreneur. I mentioned my parents were, and so my goal was to be an attorney, but I decided to go to DC for undergrad and for law school. So I went to Georgetown for undergrad, stayed and went to law school. It was really there where the idea for TGS hit me. It was an idea that I couldn't shake, and decided from basically after my 1L year that I would spend the rest of my law school time working on the business, but would not practice law when it was all said and done. And so with one of my roommates from college, we worked on that plan and then opened the business in 2016. What we found in Atlanta, and why we decided to not open the first gathering spot in DC, but decided on Atlanta, are three things. And that's culture, connections, and capital. So those are the three things that I want to quickly explore. From a culture perspective, I would argue that Atlanta's largest export is its culture. We have a great way of taking the things that we produce here and sharing it all over the world. The music industry for a long time has been the bedrock of what we export, but you'll also see in recent years the film industry become a major staple and a huge attraction to bring new people to the city. And so Atlanta has been able to translate a lot of that creative energy that's coming into town to, again, everywhere that we can imagine. I say with pride, anywhere that I go, I'm from Atlanta, and folks seem to know or have some connection to something that they've seen that's been produced here. Atlanta being able to take advantage of that, I think, has been a very, very significant part of growth, which brings me actually to my second C, which are connections. When we're looking as prospective entrepreneurs in DC around what was going on in this market, we could see that it was a city that really hadn't been defined by anything yet. If you think about some of the larger cities across the country, New York defined by finance, LA by Hollywood, DC by politics. Atlanta really didn't have a definition, and we thought that was a tremendous opportunity and something that we shouldn't shy away from. There are four industries, major industries, that really are connected in the city that make it a ripe environment to start things. And so the first thing that you'll see are major businesses. I think Atlanta has the third highest concentration of Fortune 500 headquarters in the country. And so we're able to take advantage of the history of companies like Coca-Cola and Delta and Home Depot and Chick-fil-A that have a strong presence in the market. Sitting next to them is the creative community that I mentioned previously. Major film studios, a ton of recording studios from a music perspective that are here. Sitting next to that is a network of colleges and universities between Georgia Tech, Emory, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, and a couple of other schools that if they were on this call, they would be mad that I did mention Georgia State, which is there. We have a ripe network of college students that are staying in the market. And then next to that, which is the community that I belong to the most, is a thriving startup ecosystem. Now, the reason why I think our startups do well here are really because of the other three major buckets that I discussed. And there's connectivity between those industries in ways that I don't think that you see in a lot of cities. If you look at DC, there's not a ton of synergy between the startup community there and the creative community, for example. Even if you look in cities like LA, you'll find where there's not even a ton of contact between the music and the film industry. What Atlanta has been able to do right from a connection standpoint is, and what you'll see at our club, are folks that are wearing t-shirts and jeans sitting next to people that wear suits and ties. And what that does, that collaboration allows for us to find new opportunities. There are a ton of innovation hubs that a lot of the larger companies have established here. And through the innovation hubs, you see even more new companies being born and really having a pathway to liquidity events through acquisitions and strategic investment, which will bring me to my last C that I think Atlanta is doing well, which is capital. When I started the business I was 24 years old. I had no idea what I was, if I'm being very candid with you, I had no idea what I was doing on a ton of fronts. But what this city had and had an infrastructure to be able to have a discussion with us about was the best way to fund our business. Our first round was a little over $3 million. It was a moving target. It was $1 million at first, then it was $2 million. City was patient with us as our dream expanded. The city met the need that we had. And again, we closed our first round at just above 3 million. But there was an emphasis here on what I've been calling recently in manufacturing a win for the city. What Atlanta is doing from a startup perspective is understanding that because of the rich ecosystem that I've described previously, if the city were to come together and really put its weight behind a couple of new startups each year, that we really had the opportunity to take those companies past the initial phase in their business and really get them to meaningful scale. And that is what we've benefited from tremendously. Organizations like the Metro Atlanta Chamber that convenes the business community, but similar organizations in the creative world and in the startup world all came together to really promote the idea that the gathering spot was a place that needed to be successful. The city was going to make it so. It was intentional. I believe it's a model that you see in cities like Silicon Valley or San Francisco broadly, where the city almost in a way will come together to make things pop. That is what Atlanta is starting to replicate, that I think, again, is making some of the companies that are starting here successful. We had some pretty specific mandates around employment. When I was having that conversation with many folks in 2015 and 2016, I had a team of 3 people. Today, we exist as a team of about 150. On the gathering spot side, I skipped a part of our story. There was a music conference and festival that existed in Atlanta for quite a while, for about 15 years, that had not expanded. And so we purchased that company about a year and a half ago and are producing now the world's largest conference of its kind that's still based out of the city. But again, to this idea of manufacturing a win, that was an opportunity that came about as we studied the landscape of what Atlanta needed from a conference perspective. And while we have a ton of music artists that call Atlanta home. We did not have a premier music conference that was attracting people from around the country, and so that was an area that we ventured into. So I will stop there and look forward to the discussion part of this this conversation. But connections, culture, and capital, since we're visiting Atlanta, I think are the ways to best understand what's happening well here, and why I'm proud. I love visiting cities like Tulsa, but why I'm proud to be a person that calls Atlanta home.
I want to say good morning to everyone. Really enjoyed Ryan and Pamela. Can everybody hear me okay? Just want to jump into it. It's always an honor when you are following Detroit and Atlanta and then Omaha. So I'm just feeling good to be in the room with you, Pamela. Just want to jump into the presentation focusing on Omaha. A lot of folks may not know much about Omaha. We're about 850,000 population. A lot of this is focused on African Americans and how we're doing economically. So Omaha, when you look at the New York Times, Washington Post, and others, this is what they say about Omaha. I moved here about 20 years ago. And one of the other things I learned very quickly is in Omaha, when the city wants to get something done, it makes it happen. On the upper left is the College World Series, where it's played as TD Ameritrade Stadium, $140 million investment. $300 million in the center of the city that's now become $500 million, a $390 million news center down on the riverfront, and another started out 350 is closer to $500 million. Right now, even in the midst of a pandemic, there's over $3 billion of development going on in Omaha. So in 2006, one of the things I want to talk about is how do you have wealth and growth at the same time? What we saw and discovered in 2006 is that obviously that was not being shared across the board when you look by race and by ethnicity. As an example, we have been recognized as a great place to raise a family. However, in 2006, we were also identified as having one of the highest rates of poverty in the nation. Though we saw a less than 4% unemployment rate, we had as high as 16 to 21% unemployment for African Americans. And the statistics just keep on going. So we had inherited what the Kerner report talked about as far as the tale of two cities. And that's what we were facing also with gun violence escalating in 2006. I can tell you 13 years later, collectively by collaboration, communication, and alignment of resources, we've been able to decrease poverty from 31% to 22%, which is still too high. The most staggering number is to reduce unemployment from 21% down to 7%. These are all pre-COVID, by the way. And then at the bottom, gun violence, we're able to decrease by 74%. All of this is what I call setting the table for real economic development, because it's difficult to invest in and develop an area when you have a lot of the other issues that are going on. So our process for change has been, number one, community engagement. How do you make sure that the people that are most impacted, the people most impacted are actually at the table helping to shape and make decisions? Number two is setting the environment. In order to secure investments, you have to reduce violence, improve educational outcomes, which I saw a note there. Yes, we did increase the graduation rate from 64% up to 81%. And then that unemployment rate, which then began to attract and become a catalyst for generating public-private investments. And now we're on the fourth wave of what Ryan and Pamela were talking about. How do you build wealth and ownership? If you do all three of the others and you don't build wealth and ownership, you're really not getting the job done. So very quickly, I talked about collaboration. This was obviously pre-COVID. We went from 3 people to over 500 organizations that are working together in the city to help reduce gun violence. We were able to do so by 74%. You can see back in 2008 when we started, we had 243 gun assaults in the city. By the time we got to 2019, we had reduced that by 70%. Even in the midst of COVID, our collaborative has continued to work. This is a meeting back in August where we had 113 people on a Zoom call, including at the bottom the chief of police, gang unit, neighborhood groups, pastors and faith groups, all focused intently on continue to reduce violence in our city. Another area that we focus a lot on, at one point, we were the 82nd worst in the country when it came to the African American unemployment rate. We have worked collectively through our youth employment program and other initiatives. We have become the second best as far as unemployment rate. We still have a lot of work to do, but that was a huge accomplishment through collaboration. I come from the corporate sector. You have to measure everything. If you don't measure it, if you don't report on it, it's tough to move it. So this is documented by our university system and the census data that shows you the decrease in unemployment as we compare to the rest of the nation. Another area that we focus on, someone asked about increasing graduation rates. The way we've done that is by bringing resources to families and communities and youth, wrapping around them with after-school programs, career exploration programs, internships, and other initiatives, working directly with the school district. So again, it's a collaborative effort. One of the things that it has produced is not only an increase in high school graduation rate, but we've seen the percent of African Americans with a bachelor's degree also. So it's pushing all the way through the system, and we're really literally changing cradle to career. I want to close out with a couple of other things. This is a collective effort. So as I said, setting the environment, reducing gun violence, improving education, making sure the unemployment rate is going down. We have been able to bring together from the mayor's office to congressmen, CEOs, other elected officials with grassroots. This is just a recent leadership conference that we hosted where we presented the updated results after our 14 years of work. One of the things, you may not be familiar with this, but I'm very obviously familiar with Tulsa. You may not recognize it. I don't know if I can go back to that slide or not. Morgan, if you could help me. There we go. So we're very familiar with Tulsa. Tulsa is an inspiration, whether you recognize it or not, for African Americans. Every city across the country, at least 100 that I'm aware of, had a core Black business district at one time that had lots of entrepreneurs, great jobs. In our city, it's North Omaha. This area, for nearly 4 decades, did not secure any type of large-scale development. Through collaborative efforts with major players, small players, neighborhood groups working together, we've seen over $600 million of investment from different entities, all focused in on this neighborhood, which was traditionally the heart of the African American community. I'll close out, be respectful of time here. Where we are now, we are focusing on taking it to the next level as far as ownership and wealth development. So as we've worked collectively to make and move the dial on issues that many have thought have been intractable, we have now launched the next phase through that Carver building in the background is the home of the first African American owned financial institution in the state of Nebraska. We have purchased that building. We have partnered with a local bank. It'll be a joint venture, and we will be able to open Carver legacy accounts, and the funds raised will be specifically targeted to building Black businesses, building Black wealth, and also making sure home ownership is increased. So I know I went through that very quickly, but I wanted to try to show you visually collaboration, communication, and working together to make a tangible change in these highly distressed, under-resourced, but high potential communities. Thank you for your time.
Pamela, Ryan, and Willie, thank you so much for sharing with us today. Of course, everything that you've said is of critical importance to Tulsa as we approach the commemoration of the 1921 race massacre that destroyed historic Greenwood in Tulsa. And so we're all really open to best practices and finding the best way to continue to build on that legacy of Black business, Black and minority business in Tulsa, but also prepare us for the future where we can become a city that others look to for success and excellence. There are a couple of questions already in the chat, so I'm going to just move there. Carl Newmeyer, one of our local CEOs, has a question. And then I'd like to follow that with one that Kuma has raised. Will you unmute Carl so he can ask his question?
I will try to be unmuted. I have a lot of construction in my background, so I will try to be brief and then go back on mute. I actually had two questions. The first is with regards to the journey that you've been on. How long did it take you from the time you started? And this is specific to Omaha. How long were you on this journey? How long did it take you before you started to really see this payoff in terms of, you know, unemployment rates? I like you're adding in the elements of wealth and development as ownership and wealth. Excuse me. How long did that take? And then when you think about ownership, did you target specific areas for ownership when it comes to businesses? Like, did you start with banking or construction or something like that? Or was it just you set the field and you let it happen organically? I'll go back on you now. Thank you very much, Rose.
Thank you for the question, Carl. And so we have been on this journey now for 15 years. It started with a small group of 3 people sitting at a table saying, we got to do something different. We can't keep moving the same direction, working the same way. Who else do you believe would work in a collaborative fashion? And it started with the community. I want to emphasize that. It was a grassroots sitting at the table on Saturday mornings, identifying what the gaps are. What can we do before we ask anyone else to do something for us? What are we going to do to improve our own community? And then as we started to make our own investments in it, there were others that saw the work that we were doing, and we didn't make any grant requests. They actually came to us and said, we want to support the work. We appreciate the vision. We've been actually looking for something like this. And so we've been at it 15 years. And we now, Carl, have 7 different collaboratives that work in unison. So we have an education, employment, housing, health, on down the line. They all have meetings, and then once a month we come together to make sure that they're still in alignment. So as far as categories, we did about 7 years ago, this is primarily focused on Black businesses. We started with a group of 7 businesses and now have over 300 Black-owned businesses that we've met with over the years. And we always poll them, what are the needs, what are the gaps? And consistently we kept hearing access to credit and capital, which shouldn't be any surprise to anyone. But technical assistance, what kind of back operations, accounting, finance, technology, those things might be available to help us. And we're really, Carl, just now getting to the point where we've been encouraged those businesses to do businesses with each other, through business exchange, but we're CEOs of larger corporations are saying, hey, we want to be a part of this. We want to increase supplier diversity and procurement of those businesses that you know, which ones are really ready. And we're serious now about doing this business. It's been talked about for years, but we finally have CEOs that have made a commitment to be at the table to purchase products and services from Black businesses. Sorry for the long answer. Hopefully I hit what you're looking for.
No, Willie, that was great. Ryan, Pamela, you have any feedback to share?
No.
Nothing on that particular point.
Yeah, I think for us, we've been actually 13 years with this, but the fascinating thing about Willie's story and ours, the demographics of the cities is actually reverse, but the level of collaboration and coming from the grassroots level that he's describing is something I've never seen before, and would love to understand how to apply that, because in our city, it typically has been top down, and then engaging the community is more of an afterthought. And so what I'm hearing him saying is that, from the grassroots level, really the effect of that is just phenomenal, very impressive.
Great, thank you. Kuma, I noticed you had a question. Do you want to ask it to the group?
Sure. Thank you to the panel for being here. Really exciting. I'm the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Chamber, and I'm very interested in hearing a little bit more about that incredible graduation rate. Willie, if you could share a little bit about the specific programming used to help with that, and overall, was that the graduation rate is overall the increase, but did you all measure specifically the African-American population in that increase in terms of the graduation rate? And how is that attainment impacting your attainment of bachelor and higher, higher post-secondary education?
Thank you for the question, and it's right on target. That is the graduation rate increase for African Americans. So it went from 64% to 81% specifically for African Americans, but all racial and ethnic groups have seen a measurable increase. The programmatic, and when I say network, it's a collective. I mean, literally foundations, business community, elected officials, neighborhood groups, after school groups, early childhood groups. What we have done as a network is align those efforts. There's great programming going on in the city, but what we did is created a cradle to career alignment around specific high poverty schools that have traditionally not performed very well. And then on the back end, those that are leaving middle school, going to high school, we wrapped a very targeted career exploration program around them. So it's one thing to hear about engineering or jobs that are available in the city, but if you never touch it, taste it, feel it, and you don't know what you're talking about. So at age 14, 15, we get kids during the summer and we get them around to 12 different career clusters so they understand what is available to them in the city. It's not perfect, but we've connected over 6,000 youth to their first employment opportunity over the last 10 years to expose them to that. But there's a lot of after school, early childhood programming, mentoring programs, all of those various services. I can't thank the foundation community enough in Omaha, where they have invested in expanded programs. And then our job has been to help collaborate and align and try to seek more investment in those programs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have another question for everyone regarding entrepreneurship. And Ryan, maybe you can start with this, but I work in the space of small business development and try to support entrepreneurship as well, but we're primarily a CDFI. What have you done to stimulate entrepreneurial thinking so that, and you hit on some of this in your early remarks, so that you encourage more African Americans and more under-resourced individuals to think about entrepreneurship as a career choice? I think it's difficult